Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads on Sunday, my kind of sort of regular Sunday video in which I discuss the books that I finished the previous week or started or are still working on. And I think this will be a rather short video because I have to catch a train after I film and upload this, even though it's Sunday, work travel. Yeah, don't get me started. Anyway, so the first book I want to talk to you about, let me see my list, yes, is the Irish Anthology. Kim kindly gifted me for my birthday and then even more kindly read it with me. So it was a buddy read with Kim, The Long Gaze Back, an anthology of Irish women writers, edited by Sinead Gleeson. That's how YouTube told me to pronounce the first name. If that is wrong, if you are Irish and it's wrong, let me know and give me a link to the correct pronunciation. Anyway, thankfully, I don't have to pronounce all the Irish authors' names in this collection because there are some in there. I have no idea. But anyway, so this is just what it says on the cover. It's 30 short stories, and the first is by Maria Edgeworth, who was born in 1768, and the last one is by Emer Ryan, who is a young contemporary Irish writer. So it's chronological, one story, 30 female writers, all from Ireland. I really enjoyed this collection. Of course, like with any anthology, whether it's a short story collection by one author or whether it's an anthology where you have, like here, 30 authors, not every story worked for me. There were quite a few that I found boring or forgettable. I think there was only one story that I really disliked, which is good. I mean, that's a good percentage when you have 30 stories, but from the 30, I think there were 10 that really stayed with me, that I really loved, or at least really liked. And the rest was, often very, like I said, forgettable or nice, but nothing special. But what I like with this this type of book is that it gives you really a good overview over 200 years of storytelling from a particular perspective. So the Irish women writing perspective, and I think that's really interesting, even though not every story was fantastic. There were a couple in there. The Elizabeth Bowen story, which was kind of a horror, I really enjoyed. There were others. An Enright story, I had probably too high expectations, and I thought it was okay, but not fantastic. But again, that's maybe not the reason why I would read an anthology like that. It's more the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and in that sense, I definitely really enjoyed it, and it was a great gift. Thank you again, Kim, and thank you for reading it with me. The next book, also another buddy read, this time with Heidi from my reading life, and we read non-fiction, Kate Moore, The Radium Girls, published first in 2016. This is the story of the radium dial workers. You can see it here, women starting during the First World War, so in 1917-ish, painting the numbers for clocks so that they would be illuminated in the dark. And they used compounds, powders that contained radioactive material. Radium among them. Radium was just discovered not that long ago, end of the 19th century, by Marie Curie and her husband, Pierre Curie, and had properties that were really useful. For instance, in order radiotherapy, they attacked cancer cells. They also attacked normal cells, but somehow cancer cells reacted more to the radium than the healthy cells. All kinds of, it was hailed as a kind of wonder drug, quote unquote, which when you read this book, I mean, it's hard to stomach to think that people would, like paint their nails with it or use it to get their cheeks glowing when they go out. So, yeah. Anyway, so these girls, when they started, they were definitely girls, some of them 14, 15, but it starts 1917 and it goes until the 1930s. But they were the brush. They would use their lips to moisten the brush and point it so that it has a very sharp point. So they would first dip it into the powder with the radium and then put it in their lips and point it and then paint the numbers. I mean, like I said, for us now, knowing what radioactivity and radio poisoning, poisoning by a radioactive material can mean, it's incomprehensible that something like that would, but at that time, at least when it started, it was not well known how dangerous it was. But the women started to get sick, really sick, like they would lose their teeth, they would lose their jawbones, it would compile in their other bones, they would have, all of a sudden one leg was like 10 inches shorter than the other because the bone structure would collapse. So really horrific radium poisoning illness. And then, of course, capitalism kicks in and the companies, it's two companies that we follow here, one in New Jersey and one in Illinois. They don't care and they try to sweep it under the rug. So the first part of the book is the start of how these women got ill. And then the second and the third part, so 2/3 of the book, is how they try to get the companies to be held responsible in court, out of court. So it's a really horrific story. Horrific in the sense how these women get injured and how badly and how horrible their deaths, because most of them died very young. But it's also horrific in how they were treated and how the company men, the brass, the people responsible in those two companies tried to avoid responsibility, first saying, well, it's nothing wrong with these women, it's not caused by the raid. So it's really horrific, but it's an important story, it's well told. So I thought it was a fantastic book, and the discussion with Heidi, of course, was fabulous as well. I can really recommend it, but probably don't read it just after you have eaten, because the description of the disease and the injuries is really, really horrible. The next book is a fiction. The next book I finished, not the next book in the whole wide world, but the next book I finished is fiction, and it was a reread. I saw this book used, and I had read it 5 years ago or something on my Kindle, and it was I wanted to have a physical copy, and once I had it, I reread it, and that book is Leni Zuma's Red Clocks, first published in 2016. The book was back then also nominated, I think, for the Women's Prize, if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, I didn't look that up, so take that with a grain of salt. It is dystopian, set in the US in the near future, undefined when it is, and reproduction rights have once again become very difficult. Yeah, it was published before Roe v. Wade was overturned, but it's one of the premises that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And there are other amendments in the law. So, for instance, single people cannot adopt anymore. There is still in vitro fertilization allowed, but not no in vitro insemination is allowed, but in vitro fertilization is not allowed, something like that. So we follow 4 or 5 different women, and all these women are in certain stages of their life that has something to do with their reproductive rights. So we have the mother. They are referred to in terms of their position or their main occupation, if you will. So you have the mother, a young woman who is married with 2 children, who is a housewife and is really not happy with the way her life has developed. She was in Harvard Law School, and then we have a woman called the mender, who is kind of, it's set in a small town, by the way, coastal town, in the US. So this woman lives in the outskirts of the town and is considered by some a witch, but she is a healer. So she uses herbs and things like that. And she also performs abortion by herbal. You get something, herbal tea to drink that should cause an abortion. But she also does other things, but mainly focusing on female body issues. And then you have the biographer, a woman who is single in her 40s, and she desperately wants to have a child, and she can't conceive, and she has in vitro treatments, so hormone treatments, and they don't work. And she's writing a biography of an Icelandic explorer, a female explorer, in the late, I don't know, Middle Ages or something, or. And then you have, so the wife or the mother, no, it's called the wife and the mender, and then the daughter, a young girl in her teens who has her first experience with sex and the consequences of that. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. So you have all these different women. They have a connection which will become clear towards the second half of the book, but that's not so much the point. The point is, first of all, the examination of female life with the point of view of reproductive rights in various stages, and what it means if you don't have control over your own body. And this is not a book about rape. This is not a book about sexual abuse. It is a book about the regular stuff. And still women can't control their bodies, are not allowed to control their bodies, and what that means and the consequences. And back when I read it in 2016 or 2017, I thought it was a good book. It tackled very important issues, and certainly in the life of many women, very important issues. But when I read it now, it was almost as if this author was clairvoyant, because some stuff is still not outlawed in the US, but the overturn of Roe v. Wade in 2016, it was something, okay, it's a good premise. So it's also harrowing to read how fast things can go from dystopian to reality. And apart from that, it's just a really good story. So I can certainly recommend it. Then those are the books that I finished. Oh, and I forgot to say, of course, in the beginning, but it's also, I said it in the show notes, this is the non-Victober-edition. So I'm not talking about the books, the Victorian novels that I read for Victober. I will film a separate wrap-up of my Victorian reads. But I did read a classic, or I'm still reading a classic, this one, Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho. I'm reading this with Terry. As always, I will leave the link to her Instagram down below. The book was published in 1794 and is considered one of the first Gothic horror romance kind of story. So it's set in Italy mostly, end of the 16th century, and we have our heroine who is not abducted by force, but who is forced to live with her aunt and the aunt's new husband in a dilapidated castle, Udolpho, and strange stuff happens. It's quite a big book, and it's very slow. I mean, we are taking it slow with the read. We're taking the whole month of October, and we will probably finish the beginning of November. We are now about halfway through. But it takes more than a third of the book until we finally arrive at the castle. So it's really slow, and there's a lot of landscape, and they travel a lot in the beginning when the heroine, I forgot her name, Emily, when Emily is still living the good life with her father before she's orphaned and forced to live with this aunt and the husband. I mean, you can definitely see, it was a success, by the way, this book, but you can definitely see how our life, also our reading life, has changed. That I really have to force myself not to get too impatient by this very, 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 very slow way of telling the story. I mean, it's interesting, and it's on my 1001 list, women I have to read, books by women I have to read before I die. But it is definitely sometimes a little bit of a chore. So, yeah. And then I started a new book, another buddy read. Yes, Heidi buddy reads all the time. And my buddy reader is Kathleen, from Kathleen Ann, who sometimes comes back to YouTube, and I hope she will soon. And we're reading nonfiction. If you follow my channel for any length of time, you know, and by the way, it's not a short video. Of course not. Kathleen and I are reading feminist literature, fiction and nonfiction, but a lot of nonfiction. And the book we picked up in October is this fairly new one by Anne-Marie Sicard, The Authority Gap, Why Women Are Still Taken Less Seriously Than Men. And it's an exploration of just that theme from various angles. So why are women less confident? Why are women more often interrupted? And she had done, Mary Ann Sicard, she had done a really... So now you can see everything. A lot of research, the studies she is citing, but also she talked with over 50 women in various positions. So it's a partly anecdotal in the sense that any one woman cannot speak for the whole gender, but it's still illuminating how similar the stories are from these 50 women, and then she has all these scientific studies to back it up. And it's not surprising, but it's at times really infuriating how often it still happens. And also it tells me how much of a unconscious bias I have myself, because I grew up in a patriarchal structure. So it's not that I don't have any biases towards women. So that is an interesting point as well. And I hope that we will finish this one in October. 19 minutes. Yes, a short video. Anyway, these are my recent reads on Sunday. I hope you've enjoyed them. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.